cold steel pressed against her spine as two men in tailored suits blocked the diner's exit. Harper froze, the dirty coffee cups trembling in her hands. Suddenly, a gravelly voice whispered in her ear, "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad." Nothing in her quiet life prepared her for him. Rain lashed violently against the greasy front windows of Harrison's family diner, a neon-lit relic tucked safely beneath the rumbling L-train tracks in downtown Chicago. Harper Hayes hated the Tuesday graveyard shift with a passion. At 22, she was juggling a crushing mountain of nursing school debt, chronic exhaustion, and a micromanaging boss, Greg, who counted every packet of ketchup. It was 2:15 in the morning. The diner was mostly desolate, save for a pair of exhausted long-haul truckers at the counter, and one sharply dressed, older gentleman in booth 4, who always ordered black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. In booth 7 sat a man Harper would later learn was named Timothy Finch. Timothy was a wreck. He was sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning, his pale, clammy hands trembling as he shredded a cheap paper napkin into tiny, snow-like pieces. He kept darting his panicked eyes toward the glass front door, wiping away the condensation with a shaking sleeve. "More coffee, sir?" Harper asked softly, stepping up to the table with a steaming glass carafe. She offered a tired, polite smile. Timothy flinched violently, nearly knocking over his porcelain mug. No, I have to go, right now." He scrambled out of the sticky vinyl booth, tossing a crumpled $20 bill onto the fading Formica table. Underneath the bill, he deliberately slid a heavy brass locker key. He grabbed Harper's wrist, his grip surprisingly tight. "Keep it safe," he muttered, his voice barely a terrified squeak. "They're coming. Don't tell them you have it." Before Harper could even process the bizarre instruction or ask what he meant, Timothy bolted. He pushed through the glass door and vanished into the torrential Chicago rain. Harper sighed, shaking her aching head. Working late shifts in the city meant dealing with all shades of eccentric and intoxicated individuals. She reached out, sliding the $20 bill and the heavy brass key into the deep front pocket of her stained pink apron. She turned to carry the heavy gray bus tub toward the kitchen when the little brass bell above the diner door violently jingled. Two men stepped inside, and the entire atmosphere of the diner immediately plummeted by 10 degrees. They didn't look like truckers, and they certainly didn't look like local businessmen seeking a late-night meal. They wore expensive dark wool overcoats that dripped rainwater onto the checkered linoleum floor. Their eyes swept the diner with a chilling, predatory calmness that made Harper's stomach twist into tight knots. The taller one, Connor, had a jagged, pale scar cutting straight through his left eyebrow. The broader one, Liam, locked his cold eyes on the recently vacated booth 7, then slowly shifted his intense gaze directly to Harper, who was still standing there, holding the dirty dishes like a statue. Outside, muffled by the pounding rain, a screech of tires and a sickening thud echoed through the night. Timothy Finch hadn't made it far. Connor and Liam began walking slowly toward Harper. Their large hands were buried deep in their coat pockets, their broad shoulders rigid. Every single survival instinct in Harper's body screamed at her to drop the tub and run to the kitchen, but her cheap rubber-soled shoes felt cemented to the floor. She couldn't breathe. That was when the man from booth 4 stood up. Victor Moretti was 48, boasting a commanding, towering frame, piercing slate-gray eyes, and a distinguished dusting of silver at his temples. He was known in the shadowy Chicago underworld as a ruthless tactician, a man who could orchestrate a citywide blackout with a single, quiet phone call. But to Harper, He was just the handsome, quiet guy who always tipped 50%. Victor closed the distance between them in 3 long, purposeful strides, positioning himself smoothly and deliberately between Harper and the 2 approaching giants. Without a word of warning, he threw a heavy, fiercely protective arm around her slender shoulders. "There you are, sweetheart," Victor boomed, his deep voice carrying a perfect theatrical blend of paternal warmth and slight annoyance. "I told you I'd pick you up at 2. You're working yourself to the bone for this place, and I won't have it anymore." Harper stiffened instantly, her breath catching painfully in her throat. She instinctively tried to pull away from the stranger's grasp, but his grip tightened, not enough to bruise, but firmly enough to hold her securely in place. He leaned down, his lips brushing lightly against her temple as he whispered the words that would irrevocably alter the course of her entire life. "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad. Nod and smile, or we both die right here." Harper swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperately seeking escape. Her mind raced, but the absolute sincerity and danger in his grey eyes left no room for doubt. She looked up at Victor, forcing a shaky, terrified smile that she hoped looked somewhat natural. "Sorry, Dad. Greg made me clean out the deep fryers again. I lost track of time." Connor and Liam stopped exactly 3 feet away. Connor tilted his head, his cold, dead eyes dissecting the domestic scene playing out before him. "Excuse me, friend," Connor said, his thick, menacing Irish accent slicing straight through the diner's ambient noise. "We're looking for the rat who was just sitting at that corner table. Did he happen to give this lovely girl anything before he scurried off?" Victor turned halfway, subtly shifting his broad shoulders to completely shield Harper with his own body. He flashed a polite, utterly dismissive smile that did not reach his eyes. "I don't know anything about a rat, pal. I'm just here to pick up my daughter. Her shift is over, and we have a long drive home. If you have a problem with the clientele, take it up with the manager in the back." Liam took a heavy half-step forward, his right hand beginning to draw something dark and metallic from the depths of his wool coat. "I think we'll just ask the girl." Victor's demeanor shifted with terrifying speed. The warm, slightly annoyed father completely vanished, instantly replaced by an aura of pure, suffocating menace. He stared dead into Liam's eyes, his voice dropping an octave, echoing with lethal authority. "I said her shift is over. Step aside." For a tense, agonizing second, the diner went completely silent. Even the persistent hum of the commercial refrigerator seemed to die away. Connor's sharp eyes flicked to the flawless, tailored cut of Victor's Italian suit, then down to the subtle, telltale bulge beneath Victor's left armpit. Connor recognized the all-spoken, heavy authority of a man who didn't need to pull a gun to prove he was dangerous. He recognized a boss. "Our mistake," Connor murmured slowly, reaching out and tightly grabbing Liam's elbow to stop his partner's draw. "Have a good night, Dad." Victor didn't wait for them to turn around. He grabbed Harper's trembling hand, his grip like a warm vice. "Let's go. Right now." Victor dragged Harper through the diner's swinging kitchen doors, completely ignoring the bewildered shouts of Greg, the manager, who was up to his elbows in greasy dishwater. They burst through the heavy metal fire exit, stepping out into the suffocating chill and pouring rain of the pitch-black Chicago alleyway. "Wait, what are you doing?" "Let go of me," Harper gasped, stumbling over a discarded wooden pallet as the heavy metal door slammed shut and locked behind them. "Keep moving and keep quiet," Victor ordered, his sharp eyes frantically scanning the rain-soaked shadows for movement. "Those were Declan Fitzpatrick's men. They don't leave witnesses, and they certainly don't leave loose ends. Whatever that sweating fool gave you inside, it just put a massive price on your head. Before Harper could even process the name Declan Fitzpatrick, a massive black Lincoln Navigator roared to the mouth of the alley, its blinding LED headlights cutting through the heavy sheets of rain. The rear passenger door flew open, pushed violently from the inside by a broad-shouldered driver named Matteo. "Get in!" Victor barked, practically lifting Harper and shoving her into the luxurious leather-upholstered back seat before diving in directly behind her. "Drive, Matteo. Lower whacker. Lose them." The heavy SUV's tires shrieked violently against the wet asphalt as it vaulted forward. Harper slammed hard against the opposite door, her breath coming in rapid, panicked hitches. She dug her manicured fingers deeply into the soft leather seats, watching in absolute horror as two dark figures emerged from the alley in the rear-view mirror. Suddenly, bright sparks flew in the darkness as suppressed gunfire shattered the night. The Navigator's reinforced rear windshield spider-webbed violently as heavy-caliber bullets embedded themselves deeply into the ballistic glass, inches from Harper's head. Harper screamed, curling into a tight ball and burying her face in her knees. "Keep your head down!" Victor shouted over the chaos, smoothly drawing a matte black pistol from his leather shoulder holster. Matteo navigated the treacherous, subterranean labyrinth of Lower Wacker Drive with terrifying, practiced precision. He violently wove the massive vehicle between thick concrete pillars, unsuspecting taxicabs, and massive delivery trucks at 80 miles an hour. The underground tunnel was a blur of sickly yellow fluorescent lights, screaming tires, and the nauseating, acrid smell of burning rubber. Every sharp turn threw Harper aggressively against Victor's solid frame, his free hand instinctively reaching out to steady her, shielding her body with his own. For 10 grueling, heart-stopping minutes, the high-speed evasion continued until Matteo finally executed a sharp, unsignaled turn up a hidden ramp. The chaotic chase suddenly gave way to the quiet, affluent, tree-lined streets of the Gold Coast. Matteo quickly pulled the battered SUV into an ultra-secure, underground private parking garage. Heavy steel security gates slammed shut with a resounding, finalizing thud behind them, sealing them away from the danger. The sudden silence in the vehicle was deafening. Harper was hyperventilating, hot tears violently streaking her pale face and completely ruining her cheap mascara. She pushed herself away from Victor, pressing her back flush against the cold glass of the door. "Who are you?" she cried, her voice cracking with raw hysteria. "What is happening? People just shot at me. I'm just a waitress. I have a pharmacology exam on Thursday." Victor slowly holstered his weapon and took a deep, measured breath. The adrenaline of the intense escape began to fade, revealing the exhausted, hardened mafioso underneath the adrenaline. He looked at the terrified young woman trembling in the corner of his car and felt a sudden, intensely unfamiliar twinge of protectiveness. "My name is Victor Moretti," he said softly, his deep voice echoing slightly in the cavernous, concrete garage. "I run a syndicate in this city. The men who just tried to kill you belong to Declan Fitzpatrick, a ruthless Irish mob boss who controls the illicit ports. The man in the diner, Timothy, was Declan's chief accountant. He was supposed to bring me something incredibly valuable tonight to secure his safe passage out of the city. Instead, he panicked, realized he was being tailed, and used you as a blind dead drop before they executed him outside your diner." Harper stared at him, her overwhelmed mind completely failing to bridge the massive gap between her mundane, struggling reality and the cinematic nightmare currently unfolding around her. You're a mob boss?" The cherry pie guy." A ghost of a genuine smile briefly touched Victor's stern lips. "I like the cherry pie. It reminds me of a simpler time. Now hand it over, Harper." She froze, her eyes widening. "How do you know my name?" "It's printed on your plastic name tag," Victor pointed out gently, gesturing to her apron. "The item Timothy gave you. I need you to give it to me." Trembling uncontrollably, Harper reached deep into her damp apron pocket. Her cold fingers bypassed the crumpled $20 bill and finally closed around the cold, heavy brass locker key. She pulled it out and dropped it into Victor's large, outstretched palm, as if the metal were burning her skin. Victor held the key up to the dim, ambient dome light of the SUV. He fully expected to see a standard Chicago Union Station locker number, a simple location where Timothy had stashed the financial ledger. Instead, his breath hitched painfully in his chest. Stamped deeply into the aged brass were 3 distinct letters and 4 numbers. CH, 1998. Matteo, who had been quietly monitoring the security perimeter from the driver's seat, glanced back through the rearview mirror. "Boss, we got the ledger location?" Victor didn't answer right away. He stared at the brass key, the color slowly draining from his usually composed tan face. He turned his piercing gray eyes back to Harper, examining her delicate features with a sudden, intense scrutiny that made her skin prickle. The stubborn shape of her jaw, the specific shade of her hazel eyes, the slight, familiar tilt of her nose. "Harper," Victor said, his voice suddenly hollow, completely stripped of its previous commanding authority. "What is your mother's name?" Harper recoiled, pressing herself even harder against the reinforced door. "What? Why does that matter? Leave my family out of this." "Answer the question," Victor snapped, the sudden booming volume making both Harper and Matteo jump. He immediately raised a placating hand in apology, closing his eyes for a brief second to brutally wrestle back his composure. "Please, Harper, I need to know." "Catherine," Harper whispered, her chin quivering as old grief mixed with fresh terror. "Catherine Hayes. She passed away in an accident when I was 4 years old." Victor leaned back heavily against the plush leather seat, staring blindly at the dark roof of the SUV. The year 1998. The initials CH. The striking physical resemblance he had ignorantly chalked up to a haunting coincidence while quietly eating his pie in Booth 4 all those nights. Timothy hadn't just dropped a key to a ledger containing Fitzpatrick's financial secrets. He had dropped a skeleton that Victor had desperately tried to bury 22 years ago. "We can't take her back to her apartment on West Elm, boss," Matteo interrupted, checking a heavily encrypted tablet. "My scanners are picking up chatter. Fitzpatrick's guys are already tearing her building apart, looking for the key. The police scanner just called a 1054 at the diner. They found Timothy bleeding out in the dumpster. She's a ghost now. What's the play?" Victor looked over at Harper. She was just a girl who thought she was a struggling waitress, a girl who was unknowingly about to inherit a massive, bloody war she didn't even know belonged to her. "Take us up to the penthouse secure suite," Victor commanded, his eyes never leaving Harper's terrified, beautiful face. "She's staying with me. Fitzpatrick wants her dead, but if he or his men even look in her direction, I'll burn his entire Irish empire to the ground." "Boss, with all due respect, why?" Matteo asked, utterly confused by Victor's sudden, reckless deviation from their usual cautious protocol. Victor Moretti didn't take in stray civilians. Victor slowly slipped the brass key into his tailored suit pocket, his jaw setting into a hard, unforgiving line. He looked deeply into Harper's eyes, making a silent, unbreakable vow. "Because 22 years ago, I failed to protect the only woman in this brutal city "Whoever showed me true mercy," Victor whispered, his voice thick with unresolved agony and dangerous resolve. "I won't fail her daughter." Victor's penthouse was a sprawling fortress of floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass, polished black marble, and cold, calculating silence. Perched on the 65th floor overlooking the dark, churning waters of Lake Michigan, it felt less like a home and more like a high-altitude prison. Harper stood near the edge of the living room, her cheap, rain-soaked sneakers ruining a vintage Persian rug that probably cost more than her nursing degree. She hugged her arms tightly across her chest, trembling as the adrenaline crash finally hit her. Victor stood by a custom mahogany wet bar, pouring a generous measure of Macallan 18 into 2 heavy crystal glasses. He handed one to Harper. His hands, which had been steady while firing a weapon at a moving target, now shook slightly as the glass clinked against hers. "Drink," he ordered softly. "You're in shock." Harper ignored the whiskey, staring at the brass key resting on the glass coffee table between them. "CH, 1998. "Explain," she demanded, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "My mother was a pediatric nurse at Northwestern Memorial. She lived in a tiny apartment in Logan Square, clipped coupons, and died when a drunk driver ran a red light on Western Avenue. She had nothing to do with the Mafia, and she certainly had nothing to do with you." Victor took a slow, burning swallow of his scotch. The hardened mob boss looked suddenly incredibly old, weighed down by decades of accumulated sins. "She was a nurse," Victor agreed, his voice thick with a crushing wave of nostalgia. "But before Northwestern, she did a brief stint at a private, off-the-books clinic in the South Loop, a place where men like me went when we couldn't risk a public emergency room. In the winter of 1997, a rival crew put 2 bullets in my chest. Catherine was the one who pulled them out. She didn't judge me. She didn't fear me. She just fixed me." Harper's breath hitched. She took a step back, the horrific realization slowly sinking into her bones. "No. I fell in love with her," Victor continued, his grey eyes locking onto hers, pleading for an ounce of understanding. "It was reckless. It was a death sentence in my world. We kept it hidden for a year. But this city has no secrets, Harper. The Don of my family found out. He ordered a hit on her to ensure I remained focused, to ensure I had no weaknesses." Victor looked away, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "I warned her. I gave her a new identity, a massive sum of untraceable cash, and I told her to run. I told her I would find her when the war was over and the Don was dead. But a year later, my contacts reported that Catherine Hayes had perished in a fatal car collision. They told me there were no survivors." "She had me," Harper whispered, the glass slipping from her trembling fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, amber liquid pooling over the shards, but neither of them flinched. "I was in the back seat. The paramedics pulled me out. The state put me in foster care because there was no father listed on my birth certificate." The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the distant, howling wind whipping against the skyscraper's glass. "In the diner," Harper gasped, the memory hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. "When you grabbed me, you whispered, 'Pretend I'm your dad.'" "I didn't know," Victor said, his voice breaking completely. The ruthless syndicate leader fell to his knees amid the shattered crystal, ignoring the glass biting into his tailored trousers. He looked up at her, tears finally spilling over his weathered cheeks. "I swear to God, Harper, if I had known you were alive, if I had known you were out there struggling, I would have burned this entire hemisphere to the ground to find you." Harper backed away, her hands covering her mouth to muffle a broken sob. The man who had just saved her life, the mob boss who ordered executions with a flick of his wrist, was the phantom father she had spent her entire childhood grieving. Before the emotional weight of the revelation could fully settle, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse burst open. Matteo sprinted into the room, his tactical vest securely fastened, an assault rifle gripped tightly in his hands. "Boss, we have a massive problem," Matteo barked, his eyes darting to the emotional scene before respectfully snapping back to Victor. "That key isn't for a train station. It's for the LaSalle private depository. Timothy Finch used Catherine's old, dormant alias, an account he legally managed decades ago, to hide Declan Fitzpatrick's master ledger. He knew Fitzpatrick's men would never look for it under the name of a dead woman tied to the Moretti family." Victor slowly stood up, the vulnerable, grieving father instantly evaporating, replaced by the terrifying, cold-blooded kingpin. He brushed the glass from his bleeding knees. "Fitzpatrick knows. His hackers just breached the depository's digital registry," Matteo confirmed grimly. "They're mobilizing a heavily armed crew to LaSalle Street right now. If Declan gets that ledger back, he secures his shipping routes, and he will use that wealth to launch a full-scale war against us. Worse, he knows the account is linked to Harper. She will never be safe." Victor turned to Harper, his slate-grey eyes burning with a lethal protective fire. He reached out, gently cupping her tear-stained cheek. His thumb brushed away a stray tear. "For 22 years I couldn't protect your mother," Victor whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute, terrifying resolve. "Tonight, I end Declan Fitzpatrick, and I am bringing you what belongs to us." The underground parking garage of the LaSalle private depository was a concrete tomb, echoing with the screech of heavy tires. Victor hadn't left Harper at the penthouse. He refused to let her out of his sight, placing her securely in the heavily armored tactical transport vehicle flanked by 6 of his most elite enforcers. "Stay low," Victor ordered, handing her a heavy Kevlar vest. "Matteo, secure the perimeter. We go into the vault, we get the ledger, we leave. Anyone who stands in the way doesn't breathe another breath." They moved as a phantom unit, breaching the depository's heavy steel service doors. But Declan Fitzpatrick's men had arrived 3 minutes earlier. The moment Victor's team stepped into the grand, marble-floored vault lobby, the space erupted into a deafening symphony of automatic gunfire. Harper screamed, hitting the cold marble floor as bullets shattered the vintage chandeliers overhead, raining jagged crystals down upon them. The deafening roar of firearms was paralyzing. She covered her ears, squeezing her eyes shut as the bitter smell of cordite filled her lungs. Victor was a force of terrifying nature. He didn't cower. He moved with brutal, practiced efficiency, his matte black pistol spitting lethal fire. He methodically neutralized 2 of Fitzpatrick's heavy gunners before they even realized they were flanked. "Covering fire!" Matteo roared, laying down a heavy barrage of bullets toward the vault entrance, pinning down the remaining Irish mobsters. Through the chaos, the scarred Irishman from the diner, Connor, emerged from behind a massive marble pillar, aiming a tactical shotgun directly at the corner where Harper was huddled. "End of the line, little waitress," Connor sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Bang! Connor froze. His eyes rolled back in his skull, and his heavy shotgun clattered to the floor. He collapsed backward, revealing Victor standing 20 feet away, his pistol smoking, his eyes completely devoid of human mercy. "No one threatens my daughter," Victor hissed. With the remaining opposition eliminated or fleeing, a heavy, eerie silence fell over the destroyed lobby. Victor quickly pulled Harper to her feet, shielding her body with his as they approached the massive circular steel door of the primary vault. Matteo blew the electronic lock with a shaped charge, and the heavy door slowly swung open. Rows of polished brass safety deposit boxes lined the sterile room. Victor marched straight to box 1998. With a trembling hand, he inserted the heavy brass key Harper had carried in her apron just an hour ago. The lock clicked. Victor pulled the long metal drawer out and placed it on the velvet viewing table. Inside lay a thick, black, leather-bound ledger. The undeniable, damning proof of Declan Fitzpatrick's illegal empire. It was enough evidence to dismantle the Irish mob overnight. But beneath the ledger was something else. A small, sealed envelope, yellowed with age, simply addressed to Victor. Victor's breath hitched. He carefully opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of hospital stationery. Victor, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened, and you have finally found our vault. I never stopped loving you. Please, take care of our little girl. Her name is Harper. She has your stubborn jaw and my heart. Tell her I love her. Keep her safe in the dark. Forever yours, Catherine. Victor pressed the letter to his lips, closing his eyes as a single, silent tear fell onto the aged paper. He then reached back into the box and pulled out a delicate gold chain bearing a small, diamond-encrusted pendant, a piece of jewelry Victor had given Catherine on their 6-month anniversary. He turned to Harper, who was staring at the letter with wide, tear-filled eyes. Without a word, Victor stepped behind her and gently fastened the cold gold chain around her neck. It settled perfectly against her collarbone. The ledger goes to the federal prosecutor tonight, Victor declared, turning to Matteo. Fitzpatrick will be in a federal penitentiary before sunrise, or dead by my hand. The war is over. He turned back to Harper, offering his hand. He wasn't just a terrifying mob boss anymore, and he wasn't a stranger eating cherry pie in a lonely diner. He was a father who had fought through hell to get his blood back. Are you ready to go home, Harper? Victor asked softly. Harper looked down at the blood staining her cheap waitress apron, then down to the beautiful heavy gold resting against her chest. Her old life had died in that diner at 2:15 a.m. She took a deep breath, reaching out and firmly placing her hand in her father's. Yes, Dad, Harper whispered. Take me home. Did this Mafia twist leave you completely breathless? If you loved the intense drama, hidden secrets, and heart-pounding action of Harper and Victor's story, don't leave just yet. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance suspense addicts, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life, inspired audio stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a gripping cliffhanger. What would you do in Harper's shoes? Drop a comment below and let us know.